Hey y'all, I'm Tracy and this is Just Dig It Farms. Today I'm going to be planting 4 roses in my medicinal herb garden. So I thought it would be fun to bring you guys along with me and share my top 5 tips for successfully growing healthy, beautiful roses. Tip number 1, I think the most valuable tip that I can offer you guys is to choose old garden antique heirloom roses or earth kind roses. Earth kind roses are roses that were put through a test through Texas A&M Extension Center, where they took quite a few roses and put them out in a space where there was really bad soil. They got no additional water other than rain, no fertilizer, just totally neglected. They were put out in this trial field just to grow and to see how they could make it on their own and how resilient they were. And I don't remember how many roses were put to the test, but the ones that come out of it were labeled and determined to be earth kind roses. So earth kind roses are really a modern rose, but they have the characteristics of an antique rose. So antique roses are roses that have just stood the test of time. They are more disease resistant, they're hardier roses, they have a longer lifespan, they're easier to take care of. I do live in the South in Alabama where the heat and the humidity is sometimes unbearable. And the insects are pretty unbearable too. They're just swarming me right now. So we are going to get black spot on our roses. But the great thing about the antique roses is they're so resilient that they'll just shed all those diseased leaves and just keep on growing and keep on living. When I first started gardening and trying to grow roses, I went to these garden centers and just fell in love with these modern roses with their rich colors, multicolors, and just traditional rose blooms, just gorgeous roses. So I'd buy them, bring them home, and they were beautiful that spring. And then it was just a fight to keep them alive. I was constantly spraying. I was constantly just trying to keep them alive. Then I was introduced to the old garden antique roses, and I will never bring home another modern rose unless it is an earth kind rose or it is a modern rose that has all the characteristics of an antique rose. Even though they're beautiful and they're hard to resist, the antique roses are just as gorgeous, if not more beautiful to me, with wonderful fragrance and much easier to take care of. So that is my number 1 tip for you guys in how to grow successful roses. Choose roses that are going to be hardier. Choose roses that are going to be easier. Choose roses that have stood the test of time and are easier to take care of. Also, in choosing your roses, think about where you're going to put your rose. I think one of the biggest mistakes is people will buy a rose and it gets a lot larger than they want it to get. And really, that's the mistake in almost all plant choices in landscaping that I run into. Is people buy a plant, put it in a place, and it gets way bigger than they want it to be. So they prune it to death, just trying to keep it contained where they want it to be. So first of all, think about where you want this rose to go. Do you want it to be a climber like my Clotilde Super behind me, to where it's going to climb up and run? How big of a climber do you need? Do you just have like a little small trellis that's only 8 or 10 feet tall? Then don't choose a climbing rose that's going to run 20, 25, and 30 feet long. Choose a rose that's only going to be like an 8 or 10 foot climber. Do you need a shrub rose that's only going to be 3 or 4 feet tall? Then choose like a polyantha rose that's going to stay smaller. Do you need a little ground cover rose? Choose a rose that's only going to be 1.5 feet or 2 feet tall. So when choosing your roses, look at the mature size of what the rose is going to be and choose that rose according to your space or your location where you're going to put it. And that's not advice just for roses. That's advice for all of your plants, your shrubs, your perennials, all of your plants. Also, think about if you are doing a climbing rose, if you're doing a climbing rose over an arbor or an entryway that you're going to be walking through every day, that people's going to be walking through all the time, choose one maybe that's thornless or that's semi-thornless, that doesn't have as many thorns on it, so that when you're walking through, you know, you're not getting all scraped up. There's a lot of great varieties that are thornless. There's Peggy Martin, which is an awesome rose and is thornless. There's Zephyrin Druin, is a beautiful bourbon antique rose that's thornless. So there's a lot of different varieties, sizes, characteristics that you can look at and that you can choose from to perfectly fit your spot. So that's my tip number 1, choose wisely. Tip number 2, properly plant your rose. First of all, choose a location that is full sun. We need at least 6 full hours of sun for a rose to bloom nicely and to be more resistant to disease. Also, roses like good, well-drained, fertile soil. You definitely are going to want to add some good soil conditioner, soil amendment to your hole when planting. These are the roses that I'm going to be planting today in my medicinal herb garden. I have chosen Katy Road Pink, Old Blush. This one is Hansa. It hasn't bloomed yet, but it's about to. It's a rugosa rose. And this one is Basie's Blueberry. So these 4 roses are awesome for making rose hips, which is great for medicinal purposes. So these are my roses that I've chosen for the herb garden. And these are some materials that I like to use when I'm planting my roses. This is Black Cow, which is a good composted cow manure. It's not too hot. You can't use too much or too little, so it won't burn anything up. You can put it right with the roots of the plant and it won't hurt it. So I like to use this when planting my roses as my soil conditioner and compost. I also love to use this product in planting my roses. Now really, honestly, I use this in almost every single thing that I plant. It's called Biotone. It's made by Espoma and it's completely organic. I'm not advertising for Espoma at all, but I just really love this product because it encourages mycorrhizal fungi. Now what that is that's a group of beneficial fungi that grows on the roots of the plant. The fungi benefits from the food and the nutrition from the plant that the plant gets, and then in turn it sends its tiny little roots out into the surrounding soil, and then it absorbs nutrients and water from the surrounding soil and transfers that back to the plant. So this creates a wonderful symbiotic relationship between the plant and the fungi. So in essence, what that really means in simple terms is it enhances the plant's ability to take up more nutrients and water, moisture for the plant. So it's just a great relationship between the two. This symbiotic relationship from the mycorrhizal fungi that develops on the roots and the plants occurs in almost every plant. Trees, shrubs, roses, tomatoes. A lot of plants benefit from this relationship. And what this Biotone does is it encourages the growth of that mycorrhizal fungi on those roots. So I love to always use this when I plant my plants. Now, this is not something that you can like plant your plant, come back later and add it to your plant as you would like a fertilizer. This is something that you're only going to use when you first plant the plant because it needs to be in contact with the roots of that plant for it to benefit and for it to work. This is the area that we tilled up earlier this spring for my medicinal herb garden, all the way down to the very end down there. Maybe you can see that little tiny plant down there. We tilled it up and then we sowed crimson clover just to help build up the soil nutrients. And then I sowed a bunch of wildflower seed. It's really wildflower seed that should have been sown in the fall. But I thought maybe since it was so earlier, I'd have enough time for it to come up. And I see a lot of it in here, like that is, I've got diatomaceous earth on me. That is California poppies popping up. There's all kinds of little wildflowers in here popping up, and the clover's coming up. But the grass and the weeds have about taken over the bed as well. But I do not have the heart to come in here and disturb all of those wildflowers and that clover. So I'm going to just go ahead and carry on with my plan and put some of my plants in here, some of my medicinal plants as I get them, or as I'm seeding a bunch of things too. But as I'm collecting them, I'm going to go ahead and put them in the ground. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the cardboard and I'm just going to surround that plant and lay my cardboard around it. I'm going to go ahead and put my plant in the ground, lay the cardboard around the plant, and put some more hay on top of the cardboard. Everywhere that I put a plant in the ground, that's what I'm going to do. I'll be suffocating the little wildflowers and the clover that's growing around it, but at least I won't be, you know, killing out all of this. And I've got to put some kind of protection around my plant to keep weeds from taking it over. So that's my plan, what I'm going to do. Now, after these wildflowers come up and finish blooming, then I'm probably going to come in and just cardboard the rest of this bed and put hay down and then just plant as I can. But that'll help me suffocate these weeds. So I've got my roses laid out how I want them to be. This is my sugar maple right in the center of this bed, which is also in the center of this pathway of my potager garden. And I'm gonna make a nice little seating area right there. I'm on the lookout for a real cute bench or a real pretty table or something like that I'm gonna put there and have a real nice seating area. Because I think that is the most important spot of your whole garden, is your sit spot, is your seating spot, where you can sit and observe the whole garden. This would be my sit spot. This would be my view from my sit spot that I just showed you. And I can see my whole entire potager garden from sitting here. All the way. I can see my garden shed, my chicken coop. Whenever my greenhouse gets there, I can see it. I can see the road, I can see the field, I can see the cottage garden, I can see the house. I can see everything from this sit spot. And if you just take time to stop and sit and observe what's taking place in the garden, you can solve a lot of problems, you can learn a lot, and it's just really good medicine for your spirit. So like I said, I am on the lookout for a beautiful garden bench or table to go right here. Okay, so I've got my roses laid out how I want them to be. Like I said, that's the center of the medicinal garden. And I've got 2 roses there. They're equidistant. They're actually about 14 feet apart. 14 from the tree to the rose. And then from the rose to the rose, about 14 feet. And then from that rose to the corner of the bed up there is a eucalyptus. Okay, and then from the center of the tree, 14 feet's a rose, 14 feet's a rose. And then the end of the bed, I haven't quite decided what I'm going to put down there yet. Maybe an Australian tea tree, or I haven't quite made my mind up yet. Now, roses are great anchor plants. They're great structural plants to put in your garden. So this garden is just going to be full of herbs and perennials and medicinal flowers and pollinating flowers. But this tree and these roses are going to be great anchor and shrub plants. I plan to do a video on designing a cottage garden, and we'll talk about that more in that video. But I just want you guys to see how this is going to add a lot of structure to this little bed. Okay, so Champ and I are ready to plant these roses now. So what you're going to want to do is dig your hole twice as wide as this pot. So twice as wide as the pot, but only as deep as it is in the pot. You don't want to plant the root ball of this plant too deep. Remember what I told you about roses do not like really wet feet? So you don't want to plant them too deep. The roots will rot. So it's going to be just that deep. Maybe even, you can even raise this up a little bit above the soil level. But it's just going to be that deep, and about twice as wide as that is how big my hole's going to be. And this soil has not been amended. We tilled it up and then we sowed the clover and the wildflower seed in here and put some hay on it, but we did not put any compost or anything like that on the soil. So I've got to make sure, and I'm digging up some wildflowers here. It's crushing me. I hate that. But I got to make sure that I add a lot of good compost to my soil. Even though our soil is not that bad, our soil is actually very sandy. We have real sandy soil here. And our soil really is not that bad. But I still want to make sure I add my compost to my hole. So again, I'm digging it twice as wide as my pot. The good thing about adding the soil conditioner to your hole, it doesn't matter if you have clay soil or sandy soil or what kind of soil you actually have. It helps to do a mix of about half and half. Half of your native soil and half of your soil conditioner. Just mix it up, half and half, and that just helps the composition of the soil, but it also helps for all these little roots to have some really good fertile soil to just start moving and growing through. And then, as the roots grow, they get stronger. So when they hit this native soil out here, they'll be even stronger and they can push on through and develop. So it just really gives them a good start. Plus it also helps to build the composition of your soil. Okay, I feel like that's about twice as wide. See, there's my rows. That would be about twice as wide. Now I'm going to get my compost opened up. And get me some shovelfuls of it. Woo, smells good. The way I do it is I just put that in there, get some of mine in there, mix it up a little bit. Put some more. When you're figuring, like, if you're doing black cow or a bag of compost, when you're trying to figure like how much do I need, a good measurement would be, if you have this 1 gallon size, 1 50-pound bag will plant, get out of that, 1 50-pound bag, you can plant 4 1 gallon size plants. If you have a 3 gallon size plant, 1 50-pound bag, you can usually plant 2 of those. So that's just a good little tip to help you when you're trying to calculate like how many bags of soil conditioner do you need for all these plants that you just got. Okay, feel like that's pretty good. Okay, now I'm going to put my biotone in there. It recommends for up to a 2 gallon size container or root ball that you use a cup of this per plant. This is just a 1 gallon size, so I'm only going to use about half a cup, and I don't really measure. I've used this so much I kind of can eyeball it by my hand size. So I'm gonna put me some in the hole right where my roots will be touching it. Put my plant down in here. Get it turned the way I want it to be. And now I'm going to put a little more compost around it. And then I'm going to put my soil in here, my native soil in here around it. Okay, so I just put a little bit of my native soil all around the root ball of my plant. I haven't finished planting it yet. I've just got it around it a little bit. I've still got a good bowl here. I'm gonna go get my water and fill this up with water and let it drain really, really good and soak all of those roots and that root ball and all the soil around it. Let it get soaked and absorbed in really good, and then I'll finish planting it. Okay, I got me a bucket of rainwater for my water catchment over at the garden shed. I'm just going to pour this in this hole. And I'm just going to let it absorb and sink in really good, and then I'll come back and finish planting. I'm going to go ahead and move on to digging my next hole while this is sinking in. Okay, that looks like that's drained pretty good. So I'm just going to come back and put my native soil on top of it. Then I like to go around it and kind of pack it in. That way no air pockets are in there. Now the best time to plant roses for me, which I'm in Alabama and I'm zone 8, is spring, early spring and early fall. And we like to plant roses all the way up until December. And it's great to plant bare root roses in December and January. December is also a great time to transplant if you want to move roses and transplant them. And the best thing to do when you are transplanting roses is to do it in late fall, early winter, because they're going dormant, and you can come in and just like cut them a third or a half off and then transplant it. And the reason you want to cut that in half or a third of it off is because then that way energy's not trying to keep that alive, and it can focus its energy on establishing those roots again. So we've got this planted really good. It's packed in really well. Looks good. So now that moves us on to tip number 3, which is covering. You always need to cover your soil. If you leave the soil exposed without a covering on it, the sun will just bake that soil. First of all, it'll kill any microbial life in those first few inches of the soil, or it could kill them. It can cause compacted soil. It can deplete the soil of the nutrients. The wind can blow away your soil. Rain can cause soil erosion. Also, by covering your soil around your plant, you're helping to retain moisture. You're helping to hold moisture in for the roots of that plant. But also on a rose and tomatoes and other plants like that, you want to keep a covering around it, because when it does rain or when you water, if the soil is splashing up on the leaves, that causes a lot of bacterial or fungal issues on your roses and tomatoes. It can cause blight on your tomatoes. It can cause all kinds of issues. So you want to keep that covering on there, and that way the soil is not going to be splashing up on your leaves. So tip number 3 is to put a good covering. So I'm putting this cardboard all around my rose, which is going to help me with weed control as well, because you don't want weeds growing all around your plant, and then they compete for the nutrients in the water and take away from your plant. So you want to kind of keep things weed free around your plant. So I'm putting down my cardboard, and then for my mulch, I'm going to use hay. I mean, you can use pine straw, you can use pine bark mulch, you can use hay, as long as it's good mulch hay. You don't want you don't want fresh hay that's going to be full of weed seed. So I'm putting me a good thick layer of mulch hay around each rose. This is really going to help hold in the moisture and keep the weeds away from my rose. And then what I usually do is I get my label and I put it in here. And then whenever I come back out here with my garden journal, and I log where everything is, then I'll take my tags out and throw them away. Gertrude Jekyll made a statement in one of her books that you should never put a label out in your garden. She hated seeing labels all in gardens. She said if you can't remember what the plant was, then you take the label and you stuff it up underneath your mulch or something. But never let your label show. And I agree with her. I hate to walk out into a garden and see all these little white tags sticking up everywhere. It just ruins the beauty of the garden. So I put my label in until I get back out here with my garden journal and I get everything mapped out, and then I'll pull my label out and actually I recycle them when I'm growing my seeds. This is Lamarck, and this is a trellis I have on my garden shed for Lamarck to climb and go up and over onto the awning. It's going to be beautiful. Lamarck is a white, yellowish, creamy bloom, double full, traditional looking bloom rose. It's going to be pretty. Tip number 4, food and water. Roses are heavy feeders. They bloom a lot and they put out a lot of foliage, so they need a lot of food. So what we like to recommend at Petals is that from the middle of March to the middle of September, you fertilize every 4 to 6 weeks. What that does is it encourages new growth, and when new growth comes on, it pushes off old growth, and the old growth falls off. So that old growth a lot of times is where your disease and your insect is going to be, so that's just pushing that off, and you've got new foliage always being encouraged to come on. It also helps it to keep blooming and looking beautiful all season long. What we also like to recommend is that you alternate your fertilizers, because roses have different needs. So if you can alternate your fertilizers each 4 to 6 weeks when you fertilize, give them a little something different. If you're not concerned about growing your roses organically, what we like to recommend is on your first fertilization to use a rose food with a systemic insecticide, because aphids usually attack your roses on the new growth. And if you start off with the rose food with a systemic insecticide, you'll take care of your aphids. The next round, like the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll use something like a rose tone, which is an organic fertilizer, or a grower special, which is a 1266. We just like to alternate it. And then when we start getting really hot and humid temperatures, that's when your black spot and your powdery mildew and your fungus and bacterial issues are going to start coming into play. So that's when we like to recommend that you use a 3-in-1 fertilizer Bayer makes a really good product that is a insecticide, fungicide, and a fertilizer, all 3 in one. So you can just give it all one shot right off the bat. And then, like I said, we just alternate fertilizers every 4 to 6 weeks. Now, if you are an organic gardener and you don't want to use those synthetic fertilizers on your roses, maybe you're going to use your roses for edible reasons. You know, you can eat rose petals. You've used the rose hips medicinally. If you're an organic gardener, you're trying to attract beneficial insects. Well, even though you're killing the bad guys with your insecticides, you're also killing the good guys as well. So maybe you want to use more of an organic fertilization program, which is what I try to do mostly. What I use is my first round of fertilizer, I'll use a rose tone. Rose tone's also made by Espoma, and it's just a great organic fertilizer with all the nutrients in it that a rose needs. Then my second round, I'll come back and use like Mighty Grow, which is actually is chicken manure fertilizer. If I don't use my own fertilizer, then I'll use the Mighty Grow living fertilizer. It is a product that's made in Alabama, and it's really good. It encourages microbial life and feeds the soil as well as feeds the plant. And the other fertilizers that I'll alternate throughout my run would be worm compost, worm tea, comfrey tea. I'll make a comfrey tea and use it for my fertilization. There's all different kinds of organic fertilizers that you can use. Those are the different things that I use. I have used the Bayer 3 in 1 around my roses in the cottage garden that I'm not eating or using medicinally. I have used 3 in 1 when I've had some black spot issues. But I really try to just stick with the organic fertilizers for my roses because I am trying to encourage all the beneficial insects that I possibly can. Plus, we're beekeepers, and I don't want to take any chances to kill my little bees. So now let's talk about the water. Roses need about 1 inch of water per week during the growing season. If you have a newly established rose, like a newly planted rose, like we just planted a minute ago, then you really need to water it about every 2 to 3 days. You need to keep it watered for, 3 or 4 weeks or so. Make sure it gets watered really good when you first planted it. And then if you have a rose that is already established, then it really needs to have water about every 1 to 2 weeks. You need to make sure it's getting watered. Now, when you do water, don't overhead water your roses. When those water droplets are getting on that foliage, that is just a good condition for fungus or bacteria, black spot, different issues to happen on your leaves. So when you water your roses, water them at the base and water them, slow and long. We like to say water it slow and long and not just, real hard and real quick. So just water right at the base of the rose and just let it drip and let it get soaked in really well. And if you did that, every other week or so for an established rose, if you're not getting rain, if you're getting rain, you're good, then your rose will be happy. And my final tip for growing successful roses that are healthy and beautiful is about pruning. The best tip that I can give you to help you remember the proper time to prune your roses is Valentine's Day. Any of your roses that are repeat bloomers, then you can prune those around Valentine's Day. That's early spring for us. Once that leaf bud appears, that's when you need to prune it. That's going to really encourage growth. You don't want to prune during the winter or anytime like that, because when you prune, you're encouraging new growth on that plant. And you don't want new growth coming out when we're having frost or freezes, because they'll burn the new growth of the plant. So you don't want to do it during the winter time. You want to wait till that new leaf bud appears, and that's when you can prune. And for us, that's usually around Valentine's Day in zone 8. If you have a rose that is just a spring blooming rose only and it's not a repeat bloomer, then you want to wait till after the spring show is over with and then come in and prune the rose. So when we do prune the rose, what we do is we take about a third of it off and just kind of shape the rose. Take out any dead branches, any branches that are crossing really bad and causing each other to gird or anything like that. Then you want to come in and take out those branches. So you're kind of selectively pruning, taking out dead or diseased branches, and you're taking a third of the plant off and just kind of shaping it. So if you have a repeat bloomer, usually those roses will put on a big, beautiful show in the spring. The summer you'll have some blooms, and the fall will be another big, beautiful show. So what we like to do in the summertime is after you get that little summer bloom show, we like to come in and give it another little mild pruning or heavy pruning if necessary, but we'll take another third off of that plant. And then by the time fall comes and it's ready to put on its fall show, it's got a really nice shape and it's beautiful. So that's how we prune our shrub roses. Now on your climbing roses, you can pretty much follow the same rules except cutting back a third of the plant. You really don't want to cut back a third of the plant because you've been working so hard to get it established and growing up your arch or your trellis or what have you. But as far as the timing, then it would be the same as your shrub roses. The way that I prune my climbing roses is I just come in, and as I'm training them, I'll take off any wild branches that are going the wrong way that I can't make go the right way, and I just kind of eyeball it how I want my plant to run and how I want it to go, and then I prune according to that, and I take out any branches that are diseased or sickly or weak looking. I'll take those out. Now there's more of an art and a science to pruning the climbing roses. So I'm going to try to see if I can get Jason at Petals from the Past to do a little rose pruning video with me so that he can give everybody like the exact right way to prune the climbing roses. Like I said, I just eyeball it and I just do what I think looks right and what I think looks like it needs to be done as far as climbing my structure and as far as the health of the plant. That's how I prune them. But I am going to see if he'll do a little video with me on how to prune the roses, maybe when the season slows down a little bit. Also, when you're tying up your roses on your structure, I like to use gardener's tape. This is gardener's tape. So this is green gardener's tape. It's stretchy. And that green also, you know, it helps to kind of camouflage it a little bit on against that green rose foliage. But that's what I use in tying up my roses, because that stretchy tape, it keeps it from like girding the roses. If you gird the branches, the trunks, or anything like that of the roses, then you're opening up a door and making it more susceptible to insect and disease. So if you use this stretchy tape, as the rose grows and expands, the tape will stretch with it. This is my Peggy Martin rose on my storage shed. Look at it. It is just fixing to be bursting with blooms. It's beautiful. If y'all haven't seen it yet, go check out my Peggy Martin video telling you the history and the story behind this rose. It was one of my very first videos I did, so you'll have a little mercy on me. This is how we're training Peggy Martin to climb across our storage shed here. See, we just put some screws into the wood, used the gardener's tape, and tied them up to it. That's simple. There's all different kinds of ways you can grow your climbing roses. You can grow them along a fence. You can grow them up your wall, the entrance of your house. You can grow them on an arbor. You can grow them like this on a gate. You can grow them on a garden trellis like this, made out of branches and wood. You can grow them on a bed frame or a footboard. You can grow them on an archway made out of cattle panels. You can grow them on a piece of lattice. Or if the lattice wasn't there, you could just put the screws into the wall and train it to come up and go over the awning. You can grow them on an arbor, an entranceway into a chicken coop or a garden shed or a house. I believe every garden deserves a rose. There's so many wonderful ways that you can add roses to your garden. They add beauty and fragrance and romance and structure and interest to every space. I hope this video has inspired you and helped you guys to be able to successfully grow roses in your garden. I hope that you all have a beautiful and wonderful day today. God bless you, and I'll catch you on the next video.